Right.
So bonobos basically, so we as a human, we share more genetic material with chimpanzees and bonobos than the African elephant does with the Indian elephant. So we're more closely related to them than the elephant species are to each other. The thing about bonobos, though, is very few people know about them, because I think it's because they're not when you see them, it probably forces parents in zoos to have to answer difficult questions. Because
that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, because bonobos, so they're basically, before I get to the way that they behave, they basically originated from the same species as far as I know, but they were separated by the Congo River. On one side of the river, the chimp was what has become chimpanzees, and they had to compete for food and resources with other species of animal. But on the bonobo side, there was no competition. So if you look at the way chimpanzees behave, they are capable of being sound sometimes. You know, there can be elements of compassion and stuff. Yeah, and they can be kind of nice. We're more like chimpanzees because we can be nice, but we're also capable of being immense pricks as well. So the bonobos, like chimpanzees, pull each other to bits. Like when chimpanzees decide to get aggro, they set up these war packs and literally just pull other chimpanzees apart, like rip them to pieces. And whereas bonobos only use violence, only to suppress violence. That's it. So they'll only use violence if a bonobo is starting to get aggressive. So they're only intolerant of intolerance, essentially. But other than that, they solve conflict with sex. They just fuck all day. Female bonobos have sex on average 35 times a day. And like female bonobos actually like hassle male bonobos, because then they have to solve the conflict. They have to resolve with sex then. So like you look up bonobo videos on YouTube and you see female bonobos like kicking and pushing and just like nudging male bonobos to annoy them, just to then just like lie on the ground and just they'll have sex in the missionary position as well, face to face. So they're just these they have life figured out. Like, just look at these fucking bonobos on YouTube and you see they're just chilling all day, like just lying on the grass and just splashing their feet away in puddles and like chilling out on trees, just hanging out. And then they have a little bit of aggro and then they'll just be
an orgy,
sex all over the place. Yeah. And it's just, and then that's all day, every day. And then there's no stress. And anytime there is stress, they use sex to fix it.
And also, they have sex in every direction. It's male, 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 female, female, female. They're all just like giving each other orgasms all day long.
And then, but female bonobos, what happens then? How they prevent inbreeding is that female bonobos will just pick up when they at a certain point. Female bonobos will pick up and leave and go off and join another troop. So then there's female bonobos cross-pollinating new genetic material across troops the whole time. Cool. That's how they prevent inbreeding. Yeah. So and their females run the society as well. Like in chimpanzee society, the females don't help each other because there's this scarcity for resources, and they kind of all just mind their babies and they don't mind each other's babies. Whereas they don't share as much. Whereas in bonobo society, they constantly share. Like the females hang out like it's fucking Sex in the City, and they just share. They share resources all the time, and they just hang out. And then there was the only time I've heard of them using violence or come across them using violence is when typically a male bonobo gets too big for his britches and starts trying to be the big man. And then like 4 or 5 female bonobos will initially kind of chase him around, and if he still acts the prick, they'll beat the fuck out of him. That's basically how it works. So there's a lot to think we could learn from bonobo society.
But just to look at them alone is enough to be gained from it. The fact that we're as closely related to chimps as we are bonobos means they're worthy of just as much attention, if not more so, just for the catch-up period.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Like this,
but it's like was it Christopher Ryan in Civilized to Death puts forward? He's like, it's a difficult topic to bring up because you're inevitably going to be having a very new conversation with the student at the other end. You know that these fellas, they love banging each other all day long, yeah?
Yeah. And they don't fight, and they don't have war.
You're going to have that conversation.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I think so few people know about them. It's because those conversations, as long as no one brings it up, then the conversations don't have to happen. Whereas chimpanzees are easy to talk about.
Yeah, it means there's like a heavy weight on like some form of sexual repression over society at large that makes that conversation difficult. Like, why is it even difficult in the first place?
Yeah,
we all do. It's not like talking about, I suppose you've got a career based out of talking about food. Like talking about food and water is one thing, but it's equally as important to the species that we're all having sex, because without that, we're definitely not
wouldn't be a species. Yeah. That was an interesting way to start the podcast, Arthur.
Yeah, I think so. I was wondering where you were going with that.
What are we talking about powerlifting, is it?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you of all people, Kieran, will find a way to fit that in, and we'll all see the relevance of it come the end of the conversation. But no, I mean, basically why I brought you guys here today, and welcome both of you to the podcast. Kieran, a returning guest, Robbie, a first-time guest. So welcome to the show. Nice. And what I basically want to get at here is to have a conversation around training at home with minimal gym equipment. Basically, everyone has had their training routines uprooted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And where I kind of see people at the moment is in kind of one of three categories. And maybe you guys can talk around this a little bit more. So basically, you have category one where they have equipment, they can train. You know, it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but they can train. Category two, they have either very limited equipment, very limited funds, space, etc., and for whatever reason they can't put together, you know, a more typical training setup. And then finally, there's the people that have either no money, no equipment, and they're just left with themselves and whatever implements they have at home. So I wanted to get you guys here because by combining all our skill sets, we have a powerlifter, we have a gym owner, and we have a general physical culturist. I'm going to term you Zach here on. And so we'll be able to give, so we'll be able to give some differing perspectives on this. But before we get to that, I want to bring the listeners up to speed on who you guys are. Firstly, if we start with Robbie, could you tell us about yourself, your background, the gym you work in, and the typical demographic that you work with?
Yeah, so I suppose up until the doors were closed, courtesy of the COVID pandemic, I would have been the co-runner of what we were calling a movement cafe in Cork. And then I suppose the predominant, what would you call me, the head coach, but they didn't have a very big team to be ahead of anything of the services within there in regards to the physical practices, which would have been group training and personal training. The other owner would have been my fiancée, Karen, who helps with the administration of it. And by the name, the Movement Cafe, you might get it that there's a cafe mid-centre of our building, which played a role of almost like a catalyst towards social ties and a social culture that would have been associated with the physical activity going on within the building. So we were doing more than, I suppose, just your average, like an average gym. We were equipped with weights, rubber matting, lifting racks, gymnastic rings, as well as a wooden floor for a bit more of a body weight, expressive handstand style of practice for those who are gravitating towards that style of practice. And then upstairs, there would have been practice of yoga, and another crowd that used to lease were doing jiu-jitsu, which I was also a player of. So we had quite an expansive approach to physical activity, and then the social element in the middle of it, so that people from all walks of life and all interests would share ideas then around the cafe and a cup of tea. That's gone now, of course, because we can't have each other so close, sharing gym space, sharing the same air and that. So as it stands now, the title above my head is getting a bit more wavy, and it's also very interesting where this could go. Like, so I'm interested. I think even this conversation alone is going to be very helpful to me because of these questions coming my way. Then I'm forced to think about how these things go forward because of the fact of the pandemic and the indefinite timeline of a gym or a center that has a lot of people opens is too unclear. It'd be naive to think that we can put a date on it. Like, so I'm forced to look at where I am or who I am. So it's a great question for explaining myself and for me to even think about itself. Because a large portion of my identity would have been attached to the running of this facility up until late. So at the other side of it, with these new opportunities for introspection and questioning, this is what I'm facing also. Like, who am I? What have I become from the college I was Cafe Move? And where does it go forward? But you get a small brief outline, I suppose. On paper, you could call me a neuromuscular therapist. I have qualifications in personal training and in exercise coaching. And exercise coaching it seems like a broad title, but I originally learned about 8 years ago. I took a shining to the Paul Chek stuff, as well as the Poliquin stuff. They were kind of like fashionable around the time. So I kind of went down both routes of looking at strength training through the Poliquin route and supplementation and so forth and so on. And I also had a look at a Checky approach, which should be that small bit more like a broader approach. He referred to it as a holistic approach, but the content he was putting out was quite interesting to me. So I did his exercise coach course and I did his holistic lifestyle coaching course for information in both those fields. And they've been quite handy to me to go forward to get to the movement center idea, because I spent predominantly most of my time starting with an interest in lifting weights and getting buff and just being strong in general. And then through being exposed to clients with a broad array of injuries and problems, I was forced to look at rehabilitation approaches and in the broader world that was that and what's involved in actually rehabilitating. For example, a back pain is far more likely to be something as additional to physical. So it kind of shot me in multiple directions. And I suppose where I'm at now in regards to working with people, again, of predominantly paying the bills by rehabilitating people through acts of physical practice. My viewpoint is closer to the interests lie within the humanities, I suppose, to be really broad about it, like the evocation of humanity and the contribute. I suppose if we're to do any good at all as coaches, ultimately we're looking to raise an individual's level of humanity and conscious awareness of how they're conducting themselves in the world to complement their life. What else? Well, is there more to the question?
Well, I suppose just to follow on from that, and before we go any further, like, I mean, how are you adapting your business to the current climate? Like, how are you managing to kind of, I suppose, give people a way to work around not being able to visit the gym, and are you kind of staying in touch with clients, or how are you working it?
Yes. So when we closed our doors, like immediately I went into not an alert mode, but a hyperactive mode, I suppose, like to consider the best next approaches. I get the impression, the analogy I can draw on is like falling out of a tree where you're forced to let your arms flail to find a branch to grab onto. But I wanted to focus more, I suppose, on my landing than the best next branch and not get too excited by the stressfulness of the situation. So I saw many people scramble for the Zoom idea, but I immediately went towards creating an online coaching platform so that I could continue to offer the members proper coaching, something that's going to stand to them long term and not fall into position as maybe like a form of distraction or entertainment. I still wanted to equip them with the coaching I was providing prior to COVID to make sure that they stayed physically engaged, I suppose, mentally engaged and physically active, but again with a course, with a direction for a particular outcome, and not just workouts to spend an hour of their time burning energy. I still wanted to do that. So up until late, I scrambled the jets. I found myself an app in which I can upload my video content to the app, turn it into a program by manipulating the variables of time, rest, tempos, and so forth and so on. And then once I had that up and running, I started focusing then on the editing of the content. So originally, my first few videos that went out to my clients were literally me with my phone, like talking, and in some cases talking to Instagram, because I didn't have the medium to get straight to the clients. And then as I got better now and I'm starting to settle into the approach, I can actually even work on the video edits where I'm uploading text to go along with the audio cues and then adding the progressions into it. But it took a while to get, from there to here now, where it's starting to get a bit more formulated. The interesting thing about it, I suppose, is that part of what Cafe Move offered was the social element, which is something I can't really provide now. So I can provide the physical element. So I'm focused very much so there to provide, I suppose, a quality service in regards to those who were interested more so in the physical than they were more so in the social. Because what I'm learning now is that many people were getting such a large amount of what they required to get by in life and to enjoy the whole living experience from the social element. And some were quite happy with the physical, and then some had a certain percentage of both. So those that were interested very much so in the physical element and maintaining the physicality and being engaged in the physical practice I offered, they're staying by coaching by me. I told them this. I said, only those who are interested, please feel like staying. Don't feel under any form of obligation to stay with me, because the service that you were receiving pre-COVID is 100% not on offer now, nor can I say when it's going to be on offer again. So don't feel obligated to be part of this this approach. Like, the community is still there, and we're still staying in touch via an email. So we still do what we can in regards to like book clubs, Zoom meetings. We just did a Cork Penny dinners yesterday. So we still have this community element that we're maintaining, but I'm very much focused on providing a high level quality of coaching. And it's actually given me a great opportunity to, I suppose, concentrate a practice that was relatively dilute in my previous approach. I can really zero in on, for example, I can like laser in on the progressions towards a handstand, and I can laser in on like it's like typical, like 100%, we're just here to get stronger. I can laser in there. And then for those who are interested in the more expressive content or the more opportunities for just playing with their body, I can zero in that too, which in itself is an interesting process for me to be able to offer content which leaves space and parameters for personal exploration.
Right. Now, the next question might be a little bit difficult to answer, but if I was to ask for an example of, I think almost like your avatar, or the typical type of individual that would have trained in Cafe Move, right? Can you give us an idea of what a typical training routine used to look like when someone was able to train in there versus what it has been now modified to, if that can kind of make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I could do that, because what I could best talk about, I suppose, would be first what I'm talking about here now would be group training. So anytime I'm doing group training, the coaching itself would have to be broad in its approach to take care of the different ends of the spectrum of one's ability and capacity. And within that, then I have the next parameter, which would be what is the content? What content am I choosing to extract information from to create this program here that we're about to do, that we're about to engage in? So a typical week I had broken up into what was best described as strength and mobility, because it's a broad enough term and it's understandable for the end user to be able to explain it. Like, I'm improving my mobility and I'm improving my strength. So that's what it was titled, and that would have happened twice a week. And then the methodology within those were going to be relatively prescriptive, like you would a classical exercise program. And it would have been at the name of a movement, the quantity of reps to be met over, maybe at some point we could be doing accumulation training, or another point we might have been doing specific sets, reps, or supersetting, or partner work. So that would have been prescribed up on the board. And these, when I say classic exercises, we could be talking like we're at some point in the mass of the session, we're going to meet the goblet squat, and we're going to do a single leg variation. And here are the progression list that you can vary in based on your current ability to to do this exercise. And that my role then was to facilitate the exercise execution on the ability of the person at hand. So I'm in real time modifying someone's attention to what would be best, I suppose, the best contribution to how they execute it and where they are. So, for example, like a person's foot placement on the ground might need some more attention to help them achieve the part of the squat that they're working on, so that they can move on to a more difficult or a squat that requires more attention or more skill set or more competence, if you know what I mean. So I might be going a long way around explaining this. So classically, Tuesday, the group would have showed up for a strength and mobility training session, which was laid out by pushing, pulling, squatting, hinging at the hip. Just your basic movement patterns, like we'd a squat pattern, a bend pattern, push, pull, different directions, different open chain loadings, different approaches, a gymnastic approach, a weightlifting approach. So that would have been that. Wednesday, then they would have had a yoga teacher, Sarah Fox, take them through a yoga class. And the yoga class then would have been a non-classical yoga class, yet very much so, because the teacher herself, Sarah Fox, would have been very much a traditionalist, but also appreciated a substantial understanding of physiology and exercise science in regards to the movements she was prescribing. So she also used to go into her bank of the FRC training. I don't know if you've heard of that, is functional range conditioning, where they hyper focus on the mobility of joints and holding the joint in a particular position, or holding a particular articulation in a particular position, creating an isometric contraction to contribute to the tissue of the joint itself. So she would have utilized that approach on her Wednesday. So you'd have an energy out style practice on a Tuesday. Wednesday might be a bit more restorative. Thursday then again would have been an energy out strength mobility session, focused around the torso, I suppose you could refer to it as. But I would use multiple approaches when working with the torso. So we would have dipped into classical gymnastic movements, or like your average warm up for, let's say, a lifting session where I'm just rotating the spine. Basically, I got the spine rotating and flexing and extending, moving in multiple directions under various loads, whether I'm using a game to get someone to do that, and teaching a movement while I load across the floor, or like show the movement itself. But the overall intention was to load the spine in different directions. That was about it. Friday then was again yoga, and I might be going on a small bit longer. Saturday then we had what was called the replay. It was originally called the coffee and handstand class. Not to skip past the Friday. So the Friday yoga would have been a very much a meditative style of yoga. So very much what might be referred to as, dare I say, yin, in the sense that it wasn't deliberately a yin yoga class, but yin in the bigger term, and where it is like a restorative, a re-energizing approach to a physical practice. So it would have been very low energy output and a lot of focus on breathing, and just taking time to be with yourself, I suppose, taking time to do not a whole lot, if you know what I mean, like being within your body and being present and aware of it. That would have been the intention of that class. And Saturday then was our highest social element class, originally called Coffee and Handstands, and then renamed to the Replay Jam, or the Replay Session, where we'd meet in the morning, me and the members, and as well the core community at large were welcome to this one. It wasn't a members only class. This was where anyone who was interested in moving around with us could come in for a cup of coffee, maybe do a handstand session or a play around session, or just move and get involved in the mix. So we had our core members, and then we also had people who couldn't meet our schedule, but they were happy to come on a Saturday to have a move around. And that session then would be they would be broken in half, really, where the first half would be movement games that I would have picked up over the time or developed myself using the principles I've established as most beneficial. And then also some classic handstand element of training and the progression list to developing a handstand. So this was very much based around interaction with each other, highly social, and a high level of intent to be going towards a joyful time spent. So that would have been your classical week, I suppose, a cafe move like.
Right. If I could add to that, though, that cafe move is somewhere that I've like, it's the kind of place that I had never come across anywhere in the world, and anywhere I've trained. So anywhere, like, I've been involved with training for fucking, I don't even, like, more than half of my life, like since I was fucking 14 or 15. So, but Cafe Move is this. The only way to describe it is, even to attempt to try and describe it, is just like this melting pot of ideas as it relates to training. So that and all sorts of socialization, that I go in there and, like, I'm an absolute fucking goon, like, and I don't deny that at all. And that, like, I just I like shifting weight and doing a lot of pull-ups and hill sprints and just martial arts and all this. But, like, I go in there and I get to have interactions with people that are, as Robbie mentioned, yoga teachers, hand balancing specialists, gymnastics, strength training, animals, as well as jiu-jitsu people, triathletes, all sorts, that are in there for different reasons and for different. But I suppose the common reason is just the joy of partaking in physical activity itself. Just because that's the only kind of commonality I can suppose, apart from people that are willing to have interesting conversations, because it's such there's this social element in there as well. So even the way Robbie described it there, it's just like it doesn't. I don't think it pales. Like, I don't even know if it's possible to describe what that place is really about. It's like Plato's allegory of the cave kind of situation. Where you can't really explain it. You kind of have to go there to know there, kind of a situation. So, like, and I love it. Like, I've been there since. When did I show up there, Robbie? I think it was early 2017, maybe February or March 2017. I showed up.
2020, that was all right. Yeah, you showed up for a jiu-jitsu session.
Yeah,
and you were just like around. Were you still living in Limerick at the time?
No, I'd only just moved to Cork 2 months before.
Right, yeah. I remember you passed down.
I think it was just before the Cork Open in jiu-jitsu. So, like, it was just before the Cork Open, and so it was March 2017, I think. So and it's I fucking love the place. But as you said, it's an interesting. You're in an interesting situation now to figure out how to still provide what you want, elements of what you wanted to provide in a changing environment now.
Yeah. So, like it really forced me to have a look at that. So, you start anything, you're actually studying it. If I'm right, you're understanding motivations and whys for your PhD. So, I suppose from this point of view, starting anything, you'd have a broad goal, but not even too sure what it is. And then as time goes on, you can kind of narrow the field of what the actual intention really is. And because of the closing of the place, I'm, forced and glad to do so, to figure out what the intention is and what was the point and what was the agenda. Because of the fact that I can't provide what I was providing, I'm asked, what is it what are you trying to do? And then it is an interesting situation to dig deep and find out what the overall achievement is, because to continue to do so, to stay firm with the intention, I have to be flexible with the action. And then I'm looking to see what action am I willing to take, and then what am I not willing to take. Also, it's a great question. I can reflect on the past experience and go, what would I not do again? And there's a lot of it I wouldn't do again, because from this point of view, the stress of actually being a business owner and the management of the finances and the business side of it, Jesus, boy, from this side of it, I can say I hate it. I fucking hate it. I would have started all of this as an enthusiast that I'm sure you can both relate to. You're just saying there, you're a goon. You just shifting tin and getting stuck in and training, and whatever it is. And you mentioned the joy of the practice. From what I gather, Arthur, you're a power lifter. If you're of any affiliation with the guys you said earlier, then you're big into some form of physical activity. So the joy, I'm sure you can understand, is very much within the practice itself. Whereas to pursue it further and to make it a profession, it draws in to share this joy on a broad scale, particularly to offer a facility, draws in a lot of other things, and that would be this business world, this corporate world. And it took from the joy of the practice. I haven't trained as well as I have since closing the gym. So let's say I had the gym open for 4.5 years, the center open for 4.5 years. And like Ciara will tell you, like I would be active on a daily basis with some form of training, be it jiu-jitsu, handstand practice. I would be still quite disciplined with my practice. But from this point of view, on this side of COVID or this side of the business, yes, I was disciplined with my practice, but I wasn't as internally engaged as I can be now. More focused on the practice itself from where I was, which is probably where you guys are at, maybe back again, how like diligently you can be like involved in the practice, whereas there was a lot of moving parts drawing me out of the reason I loved it to begin with. Am I making sense with that?
Yeah, one of the, you meant, I once heard a gym owner saying that one of the worst things he ever did for his, this isn't the case with all gym owners, obviously, but one of the, because we both know, like, there's a mate of ours, Gar Ben, who owns the Magic City Gym, and he's still an app. He loves the business side though, so like he genuinely enjoys the business side. Like he in that, so like with him, owning the gym doesn't seem to have negatively at all affected. Like there's definitely elements of it probably contributing, but because he enjoys that business side, which I don't like either. Like I can't imagine owning a gym. Like that doesn't strike me as something that I'd ever be interested in, because like you, Robbie, I can't comprehend having to put energy toward business, you know. So like, or then just, so it's not something, but I heard this gym owner say before that the worst thing he ever did for his own athleticism was to open a gym. That was the irony of that.
Which sounds ironic, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense when you actually dig into it. Like, and the number of people I know that like would own gyms, and it actually, for some of them, it even got to the stage where when they would actually have time to train, they couldn't do it in their own facility. They'd have to go somewhere else because they just couldn't face the place, having been there for 10, 12 or more hours a day, coaching people or running the place.
Completely understand that.
I even get that even with my own coaching, where like I coach a number of teams. Well, I did coach a number of teams. That was the vast majority of my, nearly all, like 90+%. I still do a little bit of online stuff at Sigma, but 90+% of my coaching is gone now during this epidemic and or pandemic. But the places that I would coach, I'd have keys to gyms. So like it's normal for me to have keys to like typically 3 or 4 gyms that I can go and use whenever I want. Like I have keys to Robbie's gym. I have keys to Cork Rugby Club. Another, I can go train in the GA. I can probably go down and train in Parky Keeve in the gym down there. I get out the Crosshaven Rugby Club where I was training. I can train out there. But I would rarely. Like I preferred to train somewhere that I wasn't the coach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it just kind of suited me, because then you were just going to train. You know, that was the thing. So, so I can resonate 100% with that. But that's why I suppose I have such admiration, and also I can't comprehend, like, it just because it's a totally different mindset and a different set of interests. A major admiration and incomprehension for someone like Gar Ben, who can be he's not only because of his interests and because of the way that he's been able to set up structures to keep training really well while still loving running the business. You know, so that's something that I'm almost certain I couldn't do. You know. No.
For sure. Sorry, you were about to say something there.
Just at a point that we haven't even really addressed even how to modify training yet, but a point that I think that might be worth picking up on, that Robbie mentioned, and I think especially because this is a powerlifting podcast and potentially people that are listening may find thought-provoking, is like you'd mentioned, that Robbie had mentioned, that this process had forced a rethinking of what his intention was and what he was trying to accomplish with what he was doing. Because the rug has been pulled out from a previously habitual routine of the way that business was being done and the way that coaching was being done. But I think that also applies not just to someone like Robbie who was running a gym, but to someone or like me who was doing in-person coaching, but also to athletes themselves who've now had that sport pulled out from underneath them. You know, whether it be a team sport or whether it be a powerlifter in this scenario. But but the principle is still the same, which is, I think that this is an opportunity. This situation, I think, is an opportunity to reflect, in spite of all the difficulties, especially like say something in powerlifting. Like, who knows when the next powerlifting meet's going to take place? And as you mentioned, there's people who are potentially don't have the financial resources or the space even to be able to get powerlifting equipment and weights and everything. So there's and who knows how many others, like who knows when any sporting event's going to take place again. So like, in spite of that, even the ability to train for someone like a powerlifter, because you're dependent on quite expensive equipment, that there's these other limitations but this, I think that this can be seen as an opportunity to reflect on why any of us were training in the first place.
I couldn't agree more. That was the point that came to my mind also when the list of the people you were describing earlier, when you're asking what can they do, I was definitely going to also say the same thing. The first thing I'm only going to piggyback here and I won't interrupt for long. It was the exact same thing that came to my mind also, was like, you're forced to figure out what you were trying to do in the first place. And then why so? And with any endeavor, it's best ventured with a good solid foundation and a deeply rooted understanding of one's why. So before writing any program based on equipment, I would get stuck into why the fuck am I doing this anyway? Like if the audience is predominantly a bunch of powerlifters, then like it's like, yeah, man, I get to stop and reflect for a second and go, why powerlifting? Like, what a great question, particularly for a group of people who love powerlifting, because you're going to be backed into a corner going, like, I know I fucking love it. Like, I love it. Like, I compete, I buy the gear, I rock up, the boys slap my back. I fucking love it. But why? Like, why do I love it? Like, what am I getting out of the practice? And what outcome am I looking for? Like, what an opportunity to dig in. You get to a real root of oneself there. Like, is it coming? What's it coming from? What's the place is it coming from? Do I always want to be strong? Like, if you think about, again, sorry not to piggyback and hijack too much, Kieran, we can come back. But
no, tear away, man.
What comes to my mind is the motivation. Like, Muhammad Ali is Muhammad Ali because some prick stole his bike at the age of 12. You know what I mean? A fella robbed his bike, gave Ali a hiding. Ali rocks up to a boxing club and goes, come here, I want to make sure that shit never happens again. I don't think it was about the bike. I bet you it was about how he felt at the time. And then he became fucking Muhammad Ali. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, like, if you dig back to the roots, if he was to dig back to his roots, that's what he goes back to. He goes back to a fella took my bike. And he became Muhammad Ali. So then, like, if at the moment, no, like, some people are in the middle of a practice, and like Kieran mentioned, the rug's been taken off them, and it's like, they have a trajectory, they have a momentum, they have an interest. But where is it coming from? And where is it going? And you're asked that question. The force and the motivational isn't the factor. The momentum isn't the problem. It's the direction, it's the trajectory, from where to where. And you're asked that, and then you can adapt your next steps accordingly to me. Like I said, you can narrow in that's fucking where I'm going, and that's where I'm coming from, and that's why. Like, and then other routes, like, as well as powerlifting, might open. Perhaps it comes from a place of going back to Ali. If he was bullied, perhaps it's coming from a place of a sense of weakness, that I have to be strong. And then you get to look at that, like, sweet, I potentially have a bit of a complex around weakness. Where is that coming from? I get to understand myself that bit better. I know myself more. Maybe I need to spend some interest looking in some form of psychology, because there's only ever going to be power found in another new field. Like, understanding oneself more is just a matter of getting more power. And now they could maybe look at it and go, oh, this is the truth. Or again, like weakness is one example that comes to my mind just because of how clearly the pursuit of powerlifting is gravitated towards becoming stronger.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's clear, but then why so? Like, oh, like again, like I saw, you can go back to you, Ciara, but that was just my tuppence there. Like Ali came to my mind there, and the roots of why, and it's being a great opportunity before even choosing the next exercise program or manipulating with variables because you don't have gear. Why am I doing it? And then I suppose we can jump back into like the manipulation of variables to get the same outcomes physically.
I think that's perfect.
Sorry to cut across, so just very briefly though. Sorry to cut across, guys, but like, do you think there's any danger that could be misconstrued as like, you're asking why am I even doing this? Well, then it'd be very easy to say, maybe I don't need to. Maybe I won't bother. You know what I mean? And just take a kind of a lazy kind of use it as a bit of a cop out.
That's a good question. What's on Netflix?
Yeah.
Well, I'd hope I wouldn't. No, I don't think so. If I don't know. I suppose if you didn't take the question serious enough, then they can maybe like derail you a bit. But like I suppose if you were to give the question the attention it deserves, then I'd say I think it could only dig you in deeper, like get you further down the line that you wanted to be like, I think I even think that like one's lift would be that bit better without exercise on the next day, just knowing their motivational factors behind it. They'd be that bit more emotionally invested in the act of the doing anyway. Perhaps. Again, I'm only speaking from a speculative point of view.
And I think you end up with less fragile athletes. So something that I've seen a lot anecdotally, just from observation and experienced myself as an athlete, was a fragility anytime that there was too much of a wrapping up of a sense of personal identity with any single thing in isolation. So let's say with sport, if my personal identity ended up in past times ended up too closely intertwined with my sport, especially when I was early days when I was competing and fighting, there was too close a dependency there on a sense of personal self-worth or a sense of self at all with the ability to partake in a sport or the ability to do a sport well. That in itself created a fragility. It created this, like, if the sport then wasn't going well, or particularly if I got injured, then there was this very brittle. I was very brittle, whereas I suppose I put it where, how to put it, think of it like a diversification or eggs in multiple baskets, let's say. Mm-hmm. But when you're aware of why you're doing something, which was very important to me, then it allowed for me to be, oh, that's why I'm doing it. And then, or at least, because that's an ongoing conversation, because we can put narratives on why we might be doing something if we keep asking ourselves why, and we try and have those discussions and we honestly reflect. But who knows what the actual reason was for sure, but the likelihood is you won't ever find out unless you ask, unless you keep digging, because we can fit narratives like the human. We have an almost unlimited ability to deceive ourselves. Yeah. We're these storytelling animals, especially as it relates to our own narrative, because we look back and we fit narratives to a pre-existing set of evidence, and situations.
We're like emotional beings that make emotional decisions and then rationalize afterwards.
Yeah, post hoc. Yeah. So then, but I think I think the reflection on why we're doing something, I think actually leads to a more robust person out the back of it, even if they do stop doing something. Because let's say even if someone does decide, you know what, I don't even really want to keep strength training or powerlifting or whatever. I was only doing it because of whatever reason, because of momentum. But you know what, there's actually, that either way, that's still a win, because it's knocked someone off. It's maybe not someone. It's knocked someone off a kind of a path that they were on, that they maybe were only on because of certain circumstances, and they kept doing it out of habit. Or and then it just causes this. It forces, like, just like this moment has right now. It forces a kind of it provides space to think and reflect. Okay, and what do we do now? Because I need to direct my action, my effort somewhere. I'm not just going to be this rudderless speedboat that just does whatever. So that goes anywhere. But I think that there's massive benefit. And then if someone does decide to keep training because their why for doing it, they realize, let's say, that, like, if I use a personal example, I suppose, is that strength training for me now is this reasons for doing it involve, like, just there's a fun and a sense of accomplishment to experiencing improvements. There's a buzz that comes with experiencing self-improvement. Mm-hmm. And when you get better at something and you realize you've gotten better, there's a buzz that comes from realizing these changes that have occurred as a result of efforts you've put in. Mm-hmm. So there's a major kick that comes off the back of that. And
a small risk with that then, though, isn't there, also, that this addiction to progress?
Yeah. So
then that also needs to be reflected on too. Like, what is it that I'm getting out of it? Like, am I addicted to the numbers going up and the micro dopamine responses I'm getting from that? Or, like, what you're referring to is the joy in the, again, I'm just speculating, the joy perhaps in the new opportunities of experience that are available with this new, stronger all-terrain vehicle.
Yeah, that's that, and there's that, and I think it's all of the above, because there will come a point, for example, where all you're doing is all we're going to be doing at a certain point when we've tipped over, depending on the capacity that we're actually training. There will come a certain point at which there may not be any more improvements. Let's say with strength. So there's a certain point in which a powerlifter or a weightlifter, they've reached a peak physiologically, because hormonal situations or aging of body or injuries or whatever, that they're not going to be getting stronger, and they're actually going to be getting weaker, and all you're doing is stemming the tide. But that in itself just because we're not going to get better anymore, like, you're not going to put more kilos on the bar after a certain age due to whatever limitations, because you can't just keep getting perpetually stronger. But that's not a reason to stop training. Yeah. So then there's something else to it. Mm-hmm. You know, so like that, and that's an interesting realizing. So even for a strength athlete in particular, where your sport is so tightly, it's so your improvements are so obvious when they exist and when they don't, and your abilities are so obvious. Being able to ask yourself the question of, like, well, when I'm 50 or 60 years old or whatever age, and I'm going to be getting continuously weaker, and then the objective of my training is to get less weak, to get weaker at a slower rate. It's not to get stronger anymore. It's to slow down increasing weakness. You know, mm-hmm. Then at what point then will my mentality be? Why will I be doing it at that point? You know, mm-hmm. and then these whys are going to change and emerge, but paying attention to that, I think, results in a more robust individual, whether they keep going with the sport or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we were to stay on the motivation thing for a moment, because this was related to a question that I had, and this is something I've observed from a number of people who have been talking to clients, all that even those that have, like, a home gym set up and they're perfectly well equipped to go in and train, it's when it comes to actually getting in there and going in and doing it, they're really struggling to bring themselves to do it. I don't understand why. I've actually experienced it myself a little bit, where, like, I've planned to train, got as far as the squat rack, and I'm like, I'm really not fancying this now this evening, you know, and I just can't explain what it is. Have you guys observed anything like that with your own clients? And what would be your recommendations or advice for people who've been experiencing those feelings?
Yeah, I have experience with that. I'm interested in about your experience thereafter before I go into my reply. When you get to the squat rack and you're finding, fuck, man, do you find that you do engage in the practice, and that when you do, you get your momentum again, and then you're quite happy that you pass through this resistance of this membrane of resistance, and that you end up inside a realm and where you're fucking in a good place, or you're joyful or having a great time. You're like, Jesus, I'm delighted I'm in here now.
100%. Yeah, once I kind of get going and once I get a set or two done, I feel fine again and I start to enjoy it again. But it's just, it's getting started seems to be the issue. Yeah, it's really weird.
It's an interesting one. Like I'm just going to throw out my observations so far on this. I definitely don't have a clear-cut idea. I think it's a fascinating realm to even go into. Like what we're talking about there is basically like a desire and a resistance, and it's like I've meditated or just been contemplating this quite a bit. Like, what is the resistance? And I think it's quite individual specific, but I also think it's related in one way to the practice and the last practice, each practice itself. And I also think that like every one of us has some form of that archetype, the self-saboteur. Like I think within all of us there's a saboteur, and every now and then has an opportunity to show the face, I suppose, to test your resilience, but also like to give an opportunity to reflect on like the fact that we can get in our own way. Well, I say we, but maybe I know myself, I can get in my own way. And then afterwards, like, going, Jesus, what was that all about? Like, why was I preventative of myself there? And I'm working on this quite a bit myself lately, so I'm giving it quite a bit of attention. And again, like, yes, I have experience with clients with the exact same thing. Like, they totally enjoy it, particularly now with this change of approach. The hook, the catalyst before to draw them would have been the social element. Whereas without that momentum, it's like just them by themselves getting engaged in the practice. So it's a different route now. But lately I'm drawn towards the concept of, first of all, the internal narrative during the practice. So for example, let's say a person is motivated from a place of a lack of self-worth. And within their practice, there's a constant narrative of, come on, you cunt. Get stuck in, you bollocks. You can do better than that. You're fucking weak. Do you know this type of, that approach, an approach to coaching, to motivation, to offer challenge and sometimes to offer insult and to rise to it.
Like negative self-talk kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like, I wonder if that on a subconscious level, I suppose you're less conscious until you reflect upon it, is there a time in which you're spending 45 minutes or an hour with that, with this imaginary coach behind you or on your shoulder berating you for the entire hour? Like, how desirable is it to go back to that time and time and time again? So I think I get the impression that there's a part of the resistance wall, or the thickening of the membrane of getting to that point, is provided by an individual's narrative during the practice. I do think that that's a contributory factor for sure. Also, the momentum, now back to motivation, the momentum itself to get through that membrane, I think the force that will create that momentum is rooted in the why that we came across again. Like the amount of force you have as your motivation to get through that membrane is definitely going to be higher should you have a deeply rooted and strong why. And I also reckon then you're playing with, like, this is going to sound so airy-fairy, but this love-fear axis, I know, bear with me now for a second, that like the resistance, should it be from a narrative of berating, is going to be something that generates fear. You know, I don't want to go that way. Like, if you go back to like the idea like of a single cell organism, it's going to go towards something that contributes to it and away from something that doesn't. Like heat, not too much, no. Food, yes, that way. You know, so we're just kind of like hardwired to move away from fear and in a direction of, like, let's call it love, but it's something that benefits us. So I think also, if we're talking about why and the momentum to get through it, I think we need to be doing something that tops up our love battery, or that we love doing. It gives us love, or gives us life, or rejuvenates us. It gives us, like, of course I'm going to get through this membrane, because at the other side of that, it's fucking class. But we need to know that for sure, like, you know, and then again, that goes back to the why, and then it goes to the practice itself, and then the approach to the practice to make sure that it is a joyful experience is my approach so far. Like, I'd make sure that like I'd have a journal to hand. Should I have some notes that come about when I have this clarity I can find when I'm engaged in a physical practice. And I've got the music that's kind of on a similar rhythm that I'm on at the time. So if I'm in maybe a cathartic state and I'm like, fuck this shit, man, there's a nihilism is up and I'm ready just to fucking AK a school or whatever. Like, let's say I'm just, and I gotta express this in a cathartic means. I want to just fucking go for it, lift weights or dance or throw myself around the place. Then perhaps the music is going to be something that adds momentum to that too. So then, like, the experience itself is, it's great because it's sitting with me. I'm surfing it, like I'm in it. Or perhaps then I could be exhausted. But I do also feel like there's like, I gotta move, man. You know, there's a practice I enjoy, and on the other side of it's good. But then, like, the likelihood of me moving and doing a practice is higher if I reduce the intensity of it and reduce the rhythm, maybe softer music and more mellow practice. Because today, there's no way I'm going to pull a bar off the ground today. And if I do, I could blow it back or whatever like that, because it's just not the day for it. Like, it's just not in the tank. So I think there is like this flexibility around a program. Perhaps like a program that has a broad set of parameters. Like, there's a strength training element where it's energy out, it's fucking go time. And then there's a more taking care of the joints session, and so on, taking care of my breathing, whatever it is for the person. And then to be flexible with where they go in one's week. I think that complements the idea of getting over the resistance that is inevitable to present itself at some stages. Like, that's my tuppence anyway.
I think piggybacking off something you mentioned there in particular, Rob, was like moving away versus moving toward. Like, a way that I conceptualize this, and I've been writing a lot about this recently, is if you think about it in terms of mythologically, like you mentioned archetypes, think about the kind of self-talk that Sith in the Star Wars would have versus the Jedi.
Class, you brought the Star Wars again. Cool.
So like, think of it in terms of like this, the Sith. Just look at it, the basic Star Wars narrative. The Sith, they're really powerful, but they're driven from a place of fear and it almost kind of insecurity and succumbing to darker tendencies, let's say, at the expense of other people. Whereas the Jedi become powerful, but they use that, they're looking outwards, not at themselves, but they're nesting themselves as being of use to others. They're nesting themselves as an individual within collective in terms of how they can contribute to others. So I think this comes back to the why. Like earlier on, I mentioned a potential kick that I get from training being the buzz that comes from witnessing or experiencing improvement in a certain domain. But the primary thing I get from training, above all else, is that it allows me to be more useful to other people. Like, not just physically, like I can help people move a fucking couch, or I can hop over a wall, or I can run or whatever, not just in case of emergency. But it also it allows my mind to work better so that I can be a better friend, a better partner, a better son to my parents, a better brother to my sister. Like, it allows my mind to work better. I feel when I'm training and I'm overcoming that resistance, let's say, and I'm overcoming difficulty and even navigating extreme physical discomfort, and then overcoming those sensations that tell you to stop or slow down and all this stuff, like that in itself makes me a more useful individual to those people that I care about the most. Because I just feel like it's hard to put a finger on, but how I approached overcoming that resistance, even during a session itself, where yesterday I did a session there. I love hill sprints. I guess the session where it was just a load of hill sprints, push-ups, use a tree for chin-ups, and did a load of other like high rep lunge jumps and stuff, like a load of really painful stuff that was class. But I didn't want to do it. Like, I didn't want to go out the door and go up to this park up the road or this quarry up the road from my house. Like, there was this resistance. But even to get out the door and do it, and even to put the same effort into each rep on these hill runs that were immensely uncomfortable, it was embedding myself within a collective. It was realizing that my actions now are going to affect how useful I can be to others later. So like it was, and that in itself makes the endeavor easier to do, because there's no longer a feeling of, because I definitely would have experienced lots of times, countless times, that kind of negative self-talk. That's kind of like a fear-based thing to move away from. But I think is what's much more powerful is having a desire-based thing to move towards. And for me, that's in my primary why is the embedding of myself within a collective in such a way that I'm looking to contribute outside of myself to someone else. And that in itself is just, the barrier just dissipates. Even during runs, like it could be immensely uncomfortable. And it's just like, it almost like this, it can help make intense discomfort actually feel nice.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows I think it actually even improves performance. It, like, my face stays relaxed, everything stays loose. I could be doing these sprints, and as long as I'm focusing outwards, my arms are nice and whippy. I don't tighten up. But as soon as you start thinking inwards about how uncomfortable it is, or how I don't want to quit, I don't want to be weak, that causes the body, like, it feels like everything tightens up. You start getting in your own way. You know, the shoulders or neck starts tightening, the jaw starts clenching, it starts kicking off this. So I suppose and I don't know what's going on there precisely, and this is a kind of an area that I'm going down for my PhD. But this motivational, these drives, what are the things that we use? Because I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing that allows you to more optimally overcome difficulty during a session or during a game or during a competition, as it is that gets you out the door in the best mood to even go to training or into the next room or out the back if you're training at home. And I think it's the same thing, the same self-talk that allows you to more optimally navigate injuries or periods of where you have these setbacks in a sport. I think it's all the same thing, which is, to me, it's nesting yourself within the collective in such a way that you're looking to contribute to others. You're taking personal responsibility for your impact on those around you. And I think that to me is the most powerful, because we're social animals, and that's why like we're all fans of comic books and comic book characters. Like, think about what the hero archetype is. The hero archetype is the person that goes out and confronts whatever it is that's in the darkest part of the woods that no one else wants to confront. And the hero archetype voluntarily confronts that which is most, let's say, uncomfortable, in such a way to bring back the benefit to the community, to go out and to go out and slay the dragon, or like King Arthur, to go out into the darkest part of the woods. Like, that's what the hero, or it's all the same, like Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker, King Arthur, Simba, and fucking Lion King. They're all the same person. Like, it's do what needs to be done, not because you necessarily want to do it, but because it's of use to others. Like, that archetype strikes a chord with us on a biological level. Like, that's why you can put a toddler in front of a movie and they'll know who the good guy is. There's something that resonates there, in terms of this mythological structure that resonates with our very biological necessity as a social animal, that we are the descendants of people that were able to be useful enough to each other to be able to get done what needed to be done, not because it was wanted, not because they wanted to do it, but because it was benefit to others. And I think that to me, there isn't, I can't comprehend yet, maybe I will eventually, but that to me is the strongest motivation. That to me is the strongest why. That I can encounter, that I can comprehend, that I've been able to experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a load of that's interesting points there. You talk about like the hero archetype, and like how many young boys into men have been fascinated with the hero archetype their entire life, like right back to comics, all form of cartoon characters, all type of stories, and the X-Men and Spider-Man and whatever else. He-Man. Do you remember He-Man? No?
Yeah.
Well,
you fought your man with the skull.
Yeah, but like, I wonder how many people attach themselves to the idea, or not attach is probably a bad term, but what you said is, like you said, you can put a no matter what age child in front of this screen and they'll know who the good guy is. But I reckon the good guy is the good guy because it's the guy that relates to the archetype as opposed to being of a place of moral superiority. He's only good because you can relate, like on this and me, I like there's something there I like about it. And then the hero story about going out into the dark to conquer whatever it may be, and then to come back to the community to contribute to the whole. I think that works on like a micro and a macro level. I think like what you're talking about inside your training was like a very psychological element to that concept, that you were willing to go to the, let's call it the dragon, for example, which was the resistance against you bettering yourself through your practice. I call it bettering yourself as well. And then you got through it because you powered through the narrative, or I suppose the emerging narrative of don't bother, you've enough done, going away. But you overcame it, and then you feel better and stronger afterwards. And then you came back to the community at large, let's say your family and friends, and you can contribute better because you feel like you're free of mind. But on the more micro level, like a smaller scale, that was probably the whole practice sounded like a session in neuroplasticity development, because you were firing the synapses that were getting you up and down a hill, but also that which was saying like you were also in a constant state of fighting the dragon, not like the resistance that would have been your mind to say, no, I don't want that, but by getting the reps in on that part of the psychological training that walked hand in hand with the physical training, were both massively contributory towards the collective, the whole, which would be Ciaran, the organism, the psyche. So that was to be the micro level of it, like getting the reps in the development of the flexibility of mind via the neuroplasticity of overcoming. And then you're softening, smoothing up as all these new pathways are starting to fire together more frequently. And then the momentum of motivation then itself is getting like hardwired into the system. Again, but then I can imagine too also does the strength of the dragon. But again, the reward is probably going to be that bit higher again.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like what something like physical training, especially when it's very uncomfortable, is a fractal microcosmic example of the reality of life itself, which is overcoming adversity. You know, it's chipping away. It's chipping away and overcoming difficulties. And it's just like that's what that training is. It's just like a sport. Is just like or physical activity. As I said, when it's hard, it's just like a reflection of what it is to be human at large. Anyway, you know.
Mm-hmm. You have to do hard things.
Yeah.
In fact, how often do you hear people speaking out about seeking hard things, like, and literally doing to get the reps in on it, like?
Otherwise, you mentioned those Wall-E characters, the big fat blobs in Wall-E.
The guys going around on those hover beds. There's like food handed to them, a TV in front of their screen or their face, just constantly in front of a TV.
Yeah, but I think that we that was a serious sidetrack, but I think it was not even sidetrack. It was serious elaboration there. But I think that motivational thing, I think that's a kind of, I hesitate to say, but at the moment it seems to me like a kind of the holy grail is, what is it that allows you to do what needs to be done, but so identifying the thing that allows you to do what needs to be done but you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. You know, and that whatever that thing is the strongest possible why that you have. Mm-hmm. And then what that why is what sets the momentum. And then, you know, so I think it's a massive interest to me. And again, to look at the silver linings, this particular scenario where people's lifestyles and everything in training is there's just been a spanner thrown in the works. It's an unbelievable opportunity, like, to be able to, because there could be lessons learned now that are, whereas say like that are lessons learned now for people, and me included, that could be of benefit for the rest of our lives. Like,
fact. Like, how can we go back to the last life, or like, let's say, for example, it seems like a chapter change in a book, whereas people are offered a new point of reference to a living style that wasn't available prior to COVID. Like whether it be positive or negative, there is still new points of reference to the choices that go forward. Like all of a sudden there's a pause button on mortgages that didn't exist. But it's like that exists. There's a pause button.
Yeah.
There's all these new variables that have been added to the mix that is what living was. And like all this time you have with children, like, wait a second, am I ready? Am I okay to give up this time that I've just found with my kids again? Or is there a way in which I can organize myself in the world to maintain this amount of time and attention I can give to my kids? Because consciously, I don't know if I can make a decision that doesn't allow that. Like, this is going to be an element of turmoil that's going to be offered. Should we roll out the 39-hour a week again, the regular working hours, the regular lifestyle? And the option is there. Hey, your job is there if you want to come back and do that the same way you were doing prior. Are people going to be like, you know what? No, I might try and figure it out a different way because I like my kids. Or are people going to go, man, I need that money, I'm going to do it. And then amidst it go, I need that lifestyle back that I had with my kids because I can see the difference in my child's development relative to it now. And that's just one point of reference. I'm on about also the multitude of the changes in people's lives now since this, like powerlifting, for example. Like, are guys getting more opportunity to train or give more attention to their physicality now in a different way that they weren't? Like, on a maybe a working day or a lifestyle had so many hours involved in it that they couldn't give the attention to their passion that they can now, maybe in another way. And are they willing to go back to that lifestyle when it's said, you can come back now? And I don't know, man. I've figured out some different ways of doing things in the meantime. So I think these are really interesting times for that. Like,
and that's the crux of it, I suppose, for the majority of the listenership who are powerlifters or powerlifting enthusiasts, is that, a lot of them probably do have a lot more time to be able to train now and, maybe sleep in and, things of that nature that are all going to be of benefit to them for their training anyway.
The sleep-in point is incredible. Like, people of such a different chronotype all of a sudden can go, I go to bed when I need to and I wake up when I need to because this is what I need to. And then you're inevitably going to have the ultimate in recovery and then the ultimate benefit to your performance wholesale. So you just like, some guys need a lot of sleep. Some guys need to stay up till 12 at night and wake up at 10. Everyone's different and everyone can gravitate towards where their performance or sense of self or feeling good is at. You're going to give that up?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. The sleep thing, this is a new one for me as well. I've been giving up sleep for the last 4 years. I haven't set an alarm in I don't know how long now at this stage, only for when I really have to, if I have to go pick my son up or go somewhere really early in the morning. I'm leaving, I'm not doing it. I'm waking up when I'm rested. That's how it works. I wake up when it's done. When the battery is charged, I'll wake up. It turns out like I don't sleep in so late, but I don't wake up at fucking 5:30 in the morning like I was to run a gym. That's for sure. But I am waking up maybe around this 8 o'clock in the morning idea, and I'm recharged, like, and I'm like pumped and ready for the day, ready for my training. Like,
you mean it's not normal to rise and grind at 5:30?
What's that?
You mean it's not normal to rise and grind at 5:30 in the morning?
Oh, fuck that, man. Fuck that. Like, it's. Yeah. I was always challenged by that concept, the 5 a.m. crew, the boys, the go-getters. Like, if you're not getting up at 5 in the morning, you're a waster. I always thought that was a very damaging message to send out to society. I thought, because of the fact that there is such a thing as chronotypes, and some people might gravitate towards getting up that early and being at their prime, they go on. But to kind of have a message that everyone should, and if you're not, you're a bit of a waster, I think that was damaging in the sense that so many people got on the bandwagon of doing it at their own demise. Because hell no, that's not a really good idea at all. Like, I think a lot of the 5 a.m. massive are going to feel a pain in that later in life. I don't know, is giving up sleep a worthy exchange for anything? I don't know there's anyone is anything worthy of giving up your sleep. I think there's always going to be a bill to pay at the end of that one.
Definitely. So just to follow on from that then, so we have all these things that like would potentially lead themselves towards a better training environment. So things like being able to sleep in, having more time, you know, being at home and, you know, having, you know, because there's very little going on. So there's less stressors of like work and things like that. Okay, I appreciate people probably still have other stressors now because they're at home all the time. Maybe they're worried about finances, things like that. Absolutely. But for the most part, a lot of people are primed for some really hard training right now. But for various different reasons, either financial constraints, space constraints, maybe someone's living at home with their parents and they don't have permission to get equipment. For a thing like powerlifting, that makes it very difficult to do. So I suppose, and particularly yourself, Ciaran, because like you're describing earlier on, like you're able to make your gym out of a tree and the terrain around you. What advice would you be giving those kind of people that are really stuck in terms of equipment limitations at this time?
I think if I could kick it off, I suppose, there's, first of all, just from a pure training perspective, muscle tissue doesn't know where tension is coming from. It's just tension. So if someone doesn't have equipment, the force is the language of the cell, let's say. The force is the language of the tissue. So being aware that just because I can't bench press, let's say, for example, doesn't mean that I can't put a lot of tension through my horizontal pressing musculature. So someone just said, for example, if they're into powerlifting and they can't bench, why not put themselves on a path towards put them on a progression path towards one-arm push-up progressions. Like, they may never end up getting there, but the process of trying to get stronger in such a way that you're trying to work towards one-arm press-ups will be building muscle tissue and force production capacities in that horizontal pressing musculature, so that when eventually you can go back to doing powerlifting, you first of all, and also muscle memory from a strength regain perspective is a real thing. Like, it may very well have taken someone years to get to a certain level of strength, but it might only take them a matter of months to get back to where they were, even if they're off training for a year or two. You know, like so obviously it's going to be dependent on the scale, but strength comes back very quickly. But even ignoring that, just from a perspective of training, viewing the strength training from a perspective of what can be done and how can I create tension. Let's say if it's powerlifting, it's much how do I create tension, or how do I train in such a way that I'm going to be potentially training or developing improvements in such a way, or at least pattern, let's say, strength that will carry across to my power lifts when eventually can get back to a gym. So like lower body is a bit harder, especially for the posterior chain. You have no equipment, but there are things, let's say, so upper body, it's obvious. One arm push-up progressions, pike press-up progressions, they're building towards handstand press-up stuff. But even without doing the hand balancing element, there's pike press-up progressions that build towards vertical pressing, and then push-up progressions that build towards one-arm push-ups. As things, and they go all the way from someone who can only do push-ups by putting their hands on a bed or a raised surface, all the way to people that can do all different types of two-arm advanced progressions to archer push-up progressions, building towards one-arm variations. And then pike press-up progressions for vertical pressing. Pulling then it's obvious, it's some kind of a means of a vertical and horizontal pull. Vertical pulls, all sorts of ways of doing it. Like, I put up a video on Instagram of me doing a parkour wall pull-up that you can do in a kind of a horizontal pulling way or a more vertical pulling way, where your hands are more in front of you versus above you. You can change it up. Using even door frames. Go on Amazon, spend 15 or 20 quid for a pull-up bar that you can put together and put that in the door, work towards different pull-up progressions. Horizontal pressing, there's all sorts of things that's harder to do at home unless you have some kind of a strap. But you could find railings. Like, I'd often use railings outside for horizontal pull progressions, or Australian pull-up progressions is the other name for it. That are all sorts of progressions there. But the thing with bodyweight training, that's different. And then for lower body wise, obvious ones that stand out for the lower body are pistol squat progressions. So building towards being able to do pistol squats as well for let's say it's more of a squat pattern, obviously, or shrimp squats for more of a squat pattern. And then for the posterior chain, it's a bit harder, but there'd be things like even Nordics, for example, if you have someone to hold your heels down or some way of hankering your heels, even manually if you live with someone who can do it, manually partner resisted hamstring curls, where someone is grabbing you by the heel and you're just using them as a hamstring curl machine, or single leg eccentric work, all sorts of stuff. And then, but you also have something like hip dominant, like something like a single leg. There's Robbie actually introduced this one to me, and I love it. Is the single leg stiff knee good morning. It absolutely lights up the hamstrings. And there's different, and then there's ways of eventually as the range of motion improves. And that's a weird exercise, but you can look up instructionals for it online. Then there's ways of making that movement harder by potentially holding a stack of books or bricks out the back garden or whatever as you go along. And then what becomes more difficult are things like loading the torso to be able to develop muscle tissue and strength around the torso musculature, rather than say, I don't know, core, but you know what I mean? Like low back or abs, obliques, that kind of stuff.
We all hate the term, but we know what it means.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I think of it like torso training, because it's just kind of like, all right, that area there from your gooch to your chest, let's say, that area there, and you just like look at side plank progressions as an example. Like there's all sorts of really spicy side plank progressions that you can do, all the way from the obvious standard ones where you're just on your elbow and your knees are bent or straight or whatever, all the way up to different Copenhagen plank variations where you're holding yourself up with one leg on a raised surface and your bottom arm, and then you can have movement within that. You can make it harder by putting objects on your hip to load that low back and oblique system, and in your core, your anterior torso, let's say, all sorts of different hollow rock, hollow body positions from gymnastics, leg raise progressions if you have something to hang from, to build muscle tissue and force production capabilities around the let's say the anterior torso. And then for the lower back, you have movements like, again, from gymnastics, all sorts of different Superman variations, with and without arms extended, closed, prisoner positions, isometric, or actually moving concentric, eccentric for the look. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do, but the difference with bodyweight training, I suppose, the principles are still the same from a training perspective, which is, as you get better, you need to make what you do harder somehow in order to drive on further adaptation. That's what progressive overload is. There's a lot of confusion over progressive overload, where they think, okay, if I want to get better, I have to keep adding weight to the bar, or I have to keep. No, you don't put weight on the bar. You don't get better because you put weight on the bar. You've gotten better, so you need to put weight on the bar in order to stress yourself out further, to stimulate further adaptive processes. People look at it the other way around. It's that you get better, so you have to make it harder, not that you make it harder so you get better. So I think that's the underlying confusion with progressive overload that I think a lot of people have. But that principle still applies. But unlike powerlifting, where you have these fixed movements, or strength training with external loads, where we have these fixed movements and we make them easier or harder by increasing the amount of kilos that we're moving. With gymnastic strength training or bodyweight strength training, which I've been into for years, I love it. I don't do very advanced progressions by any means, but I really enjoy it. And we don't make it harder by increasing or decreasing the load, obviously, because there isn't a load other than what your own body is. We make it harder by changing the leverage of the position. And obviously that's not including tempos or doing more reps or sets or whatever. That's just looking at within a set amount of reps, how do I put more tension on the appropriate musculature? You make the progression more difficult, essentially. So then it involves, for anyone who doesn't have any equipment, which is something that I'm a big fan of this training for a long time anyway. So my own training hasn't changed a whole lot, other than I can't go to a gym and I can't do partner orientated stuff. I can't do any martial arts stuff. But from a strength training perspective, it just means there will be a bit of a learning curve to people being able to learn, because you have to learn almost a new movement repertoire because you have to kind of learn progressions for movements and regressions to make things harder or easier depending on what kind of sets and reps you want to work in. So like you could have some horizontal pressing work that are more, let's say, strength orientated classically, where sets of 3, 4, 5 reps are spicy. And then you could have more volume orientated work where sets of between 10 and 20 reps are where it's spicy. But you can't adjust the load, or you can just adjust the movement. So you need to have a repertoire of understanding how to make certain, let's say, to go bring it back, how push-up progressions get harder or easier, depending on what kind of a stimulus you're looking to apply, whether it's a more strength-orientated, tension-orientated, or tension-focused, or volume-orientated, kind of, let's call it just a typical bodybuilding kind of voluminous range, you know. So like they're things that spring to mind for me purely from a training perspective.
And just to follow on from that, Kieran, so let's say I give you a budget of about €100 and you can buy whatever you want with it to supplement that. What would you be purchasing?
I think what jumps to mind straight away is a set of gymnastics rings and something to hang them off. So like you might, because, or you just have a set of gymnastics rings and go to a park near your house, or some kind of parking structure that you can hang, or some kind of a pole that you can hang the rings off. Because from an upper body training tool, there's limitless progressions, regardless of how strong you are. There's uncapped progressions with a set of gymnastics rings for any plane of movement that you want to train. So horizontal pressing and pulling at any angle, and vertical pressing and pulling at any angle, you can use rings for. So that jumps out to mind straight away. And then, but then again, and you also have a means of, they also come in handy for things like even lower body training, like being able to put your feet into them and use them for hamstring curls. You know, you put them really low to the ground and you can put your feet in, use it for hamstring curls, put your feet into them and use them for different torso strength exercises, as well as being able to use them for balance to do pistol squat progressions. So you'll be able to hang them off something and just hold on to them, you know. So like they stand out as a very useful tool. One other thing as well that stands out is, and they're not that expensive, you get a really good set of gymnastics rings for 30 or 40 quid. Another something else that stands out as well, and I don't know, it's hard to know how well if this would carry across to powerlifting directly, but I think if at all, but I think indirectly, just I love the idea of if we can create loads of tension in the gym or strength training, where we can with strength training, maybe not tension is the word, but let's say a lot of intensity. I think there's a lot of benefit just for a human to be able to sprint, just like flat out sprinting. There's something very enjoyable about it, and just something that's such a potent global stimulus on the body because of it's just flat out running on a hill, on the flat, doesn't matter. I use a lot of hills because it's probably lower likelihood of getting hurt. You know, there's lower likelihood of any kind of, but I also just enjoy that grind up a hill as well. But I think that's something else to consider, even if someone is a powerlifter and they don't have access to like a combination of gymnastic strength training, focusing on those patterns like lower body knee dominant, lower body hip dominant, push pull horizontal, push pull vertical, and then direct torso training to make up for the fact that a pistol squat is obviously very different to a barbell squat, because you're not loading the torso and the spine as well. So you need to do direct torso training that you might not have done before, because otherwise your lumbar erectors, your obliques and everything aren't going to get that same kind of stimulus that they would have gotten when you had a bar on your back and you were front squatting or something. So they're thoughts that jump to mind for me on those. What about you, Rob?
Robbie and the dad?
Yeah, I would everything you said there, absolutely. Just while it's still in my head, we were talking about lower body, posterior chain stuff there. Also to add to the mix, with if your guys that are listening that are taking notes, prior to the Nordic, there's also a variation called the Harrop curl that might be a nice step to go to. Same thing, lock the legs down, and also the sliders. If you've ever seen sliders where you're lying flat on your back, your heels are on something slidey, you extend the hips and flex the knee. and it's a lovely pull on the hamstring. And then the next progression from there would be a single leg version of it. Like you can get miles out of that exercise by itself. Like there's loads there.
You can use a skateboard for it as well.
You can use a skateboard or just a jumper on a wooden floor does the job.
Yeah.
It's grand. And for the harp, to fix your legs in the harp, if you are getting the gymnastic rings, the gymnastic rings I tie around the bench myself, so that it acts then as an anchor. So if this is the bench here, and I strap the gymnastic ring strap around the bench, you can put your foot and your ankle goes through the strap and sits over the edge of the bench. So it acts then as the fixed point for your around the place of your Achilles tendon for Nordics and Harrops. And then the other option to fix your foot for the Nordic and the Harrops is actually, I've seen someone, you can stick your foot underneath the car.
Yeah.
You can have your like a sponge or anything to protect your knees. If your foot's big enough, you can stick it under the car and you can do your Harrops and Nordics off the skirting of the car.
That's class. That is fucking genius.
That's a handy one. And I saw the same guy as well. He was pushing his car, just leaning against his back and just doing leg extensions by pushing the car. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you're a car owner, you could just lug your car around the place too if you wanted to put load through your organism, like.
But you want to get a housemate or something to steer it for you while you're pushing it up the road.
don't be messing around on the hills. This could be an awful fucking thing to be advising young fellas to do. Mom, can I have the keys to your car there?
Yeah.
Was there anything else on the exercise thing that came to mind? You pretty much hit the gymnastic rings. You touched on tempo. I thought it might be specific because I'm just thinking about your audience now. I'm not familiar with the audience, but as you're talking, I get the idea they're going to be a young audience to an old audience in regards to powerlifting. And when you touch, so that would be experience and wealth of knowledge then is what I'm referring to there. Like, and when you touch on tempo, I think that's a very interesting point. That is such an important variable within a program. But like huge tempos in any one of the movement patterns, like the hinge, the squat itself, and the press, massive tempos can only be beneficial to that when you're forced in on how you organize your structure around particular joints. So for example, like if you're running a train in the squat and you're paying plenty of attention to the bare foot connection to the floor, and you don't have a load at the moment to play around with, or you do have a load, but the amount of time it takes you to get to the end of the squat is a huge variable to play with in itself, while paying all the attention in the world to how your ankle, knee, and hip sit above that fixed foot position. So if the foot was thought of as an unfixed variable, that it's the role of the trainee to make sure that the foot has maximum amount of contact with the ground, around the front balls of the foot, the heel,
tripod,
the grip of the toe, the tripod stance, and grabbing the ground. If that's not a variable, that's a fixed thing, then you're forced then to organize the structure above that. And then if you manipulate the time in which you're doing a squat while maintaining that fixed position, that's going to feed back into someone's performance leaps and bounds. Again, back to this neuroplasticity and this kinetic integration idea of just how efficiently somebody performs a squat relative to their frame. Like if there's ever a time to do something like that, now is it if you don't have the weights. You can't but get paid for paying attention to that type of practice also.
Nice, yeah. I think that, and it's about, especially when, that's even when there's no equipment. That's even where even with no equipment at all, and then you spend 30, 40 quid.
A 60-second squat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like 30 seconds down, 30 seconds up. What's not a variable is how your foot moves. And that's where your attention's at. How do I organize myself above my feet? And where do I fit into a squat? How is my ideal squat? Because between the pelvic girdle and people's bone structure, everyone's different. Everyone's internal cues are different. Like so you often hear knees out and this type of stuff is too broad. It needs to be specific to the individual. And what better time to find exactly how one person fits into their squat and their hinge and their press. Again, a push-up position, for example, is if that's all you have. Where your hands relative to your chest and your elbows relative to your wrists for the maximum amount of control you can be in that position over a huge extended period of time.
Tempo, yeah, super slow stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And what I would add to that would be...
They call that extreme isometrics. What's this? I've heard, is it...
That's what it sounds like. But extreme then adds a fucking snazzy Western thing to it. Doesn't it? But if it's just like attention to detail, if you'd call it that, like, and then the maintenance then of nothing but nasal breathing throughout, so as not to have some form of sympathetic response to it. Like, if that's another variable, like, I must stay breathing in and out of my nose through the entire practice, and I must keep my both feet in contact with the ground perfectly, and then they're not variables. And then I could do maybe a squat for 6. Maybe I take 2 minutes to do a squat.
A minute down, a minute up.
What are the lads? The Louis Simmons. That's Westside Barbell, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see that they have 3 prerequisites that they suggest: the 3 minute wall squat, a 3 minute body plank, elbow body plank, and what was the other one? Fuck it, what was the other one? He said there's just 3 prerequisites that they say anyone should have, like, before they're even beginning to load them big time underneath the bar. He just put it up on his Instagram there a few weeks ago. I thought it was an interesting one just to go back to as a point of reference. Like, do I have these? Do I have these bare minimum that Louis Simmons suggests I have? Like, can I sit against a wall, 90 degrees knee, 90 degree at the hip for 3 minutes?
Yeah. Kieran, if I was to give you another situation now, so let's say someone has a barbell and enough plates to kind of work away with. They have some mats for the floor, but they've no squat rack, no bench or anything like that. So they can obviously deadlift fine and do all the various different variations of that. But how would you incorporate a squat and any kind of push patterns given just those constraints?
Movements that jump out. I'm a big fan of, if you say you have a bar and a backyard, just Zercher squat. Deadlift to the knee, underhook the bar, Zercher squat. And like, I don't know if you could look up videos online of someone that say it's kind of like a semi-sumo-ish kind of a deadlift. Start knee bending, rest the bar on top of your knees, underhook it so it's in the crook of the elbow, and then they're off to the races then with a Zercher squat. And then you could go the same crack with pressing wise. It's a little bit, and this is if you have no partners. So like, this is again on the assumption you're training by yourself. This is assuming you don't have housemates or something that can pick up a bar for you. As if you do, like, I've done this a lot with rugby players, where we had one particular place I coached, we only had 2 squat racks, but I got to have 18 or 20 fellas training at the same time. So I'd have guys working pods of 3, or 2 fellas pick up the bar at each end, and then the third fella comes in and underhooks it and starts Zercher squatting. And then it's the same crack with floor pressing. 2 fellas pick up the bar, and then they lower it down into the hands of the third fella on the ground to floor press. But then if someone wants to floor press, but then doesn't have any partner, then I kind of call it, like, it's like a hip thrust. I kind of nickname it a goon thrust, where you kind of get set up underneath the bar under your waist, and then you hip thrust it up and you literally stop it above you. So you just want to be careful with that, practice with lighter weights to get a feel for it and what it's like, because you have to control this flying barbell, while you're holding it. So I have a video on Instagram of me doing that as well. I don't think I have one of me Zerchering from the floor, but I definitely have one of me hip thrust or floor pressing from a hip thrust. I'm pretty sure I have something like that up on Instagram anyway. But there'll be examples of pressing and squatting. And then even that Zercher grip, and that's not including something like a power clean into a front squat position so that someone can front squat then from there. So that's not even looking at that as an option. But let's assume someone can't power clean safely to where they can front rack the bar. This is a potential time in which they could practice, but with lighter loads. But then to piggyback on what Robbie said, if they're limited by load and you're limited by what kind of what kind of weight you can pick up, then I think adding, because there could be really strong people in listening to this potentially, and that weights, like whatever weight they have at home might not be heavy enough to make it harder. And this is where, again, tempos can come into play to make a Zercher squat harder, like sets of 5 reps with a 10-second eccentric, just say, like, for example, or sets of 6 with a 10-second eccentric, and then a more explosive, let's say, or fast or concentric phase. That's just a way of making a weight that, okay, I don't have enough weight to make sets of 5 or 6 or whatever hard enough, so then I can just play around with the tempo to make it more difficult. Or someone could pre-fatigue let's say they were able to Zercher squat, or even if they're able to back squat, but they don't have enough weight to make a back squat hard enough because they're just limited by what they were able to afford, let's say. Then pre-fatigue with single leg work, so that you get a big quad training stimulus or hip extension, knee extension stimulus with like some heavier lunges. So maybe then you just get your strength work done with single leg stuff. So you do sets of 3 or 5 reps, let's say, or whatever you have weight wise that can make lunges or reverse lunges more difficult. So you're maybe, and then, or even if you only have very little weight, higher rep lunges to fatigue that musculature. And then by the time you come to a squat, you're going to be able to make the squat harder simply by having pre-fatigued your hip extension, knee extension musculature earlier in the session. So now all of a sudden, what weight was going to be too light to make a Zercher squat any difficult, or a front squat or a back squat harder, it now has become more difficult. So that kind of springs to mind. And the same could be said with something like a floor press. Someone doesn't have enough weight to make a floor press hard. Then if they were to spend a bit of time beforehand doing some overhead pressing, then some of their pressing musculature is going to be fatigued by the time they get to a floor press. And now all of a sudden, there's more of a feeling of whatever weight, 100 kilos or whatever they had, is now more difficult than it would have been if they'd started with it. So I think they're kind of principles that can come into play, as well as things like blood flow restriction stuff. If people wanted to play or able to have the knowledge and had the ability to play around with that with regards to straps. So like someone could potentially look at training their their knee extensors and their knee flexors and the arms with tourniquets, so that they can look into blood flow restriction training, how that works. And you probably know a lot more about that than me, because I remember you doing it in the gym. But that's potentially a way of making limited weight feel much heavier and get a lot more tension on the limb musculature. I think that kind of covers it. I think. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, either of you?
I'm slightly drawn towards, like, I wonder how much range of motion and flexibility is taken into consideration by the community at large.
I think a lot of it, from what I've seen from the outside and my time around it, once someone has the ability to operate over the range of motion demanded by the needs of the sport itself, I don't see it. I don't think it's much of a priority. But Arthur, you could elaborate on that, because I go along with that. I think it's not considered a priority, or even a kind of a secondary goal for most people. That to the best of my knowledge, anyway.
That's interesting. Maybe that's an area worth exploring. Maybe just even for research purposes. Just like perhaps some of the community have neglected their potential force output because of their length of tissues, or maybe some tissues are stuck in a shortened position. Things like a sissy squat might be a nice addition to a program there for someone. It'll give nice feedback to the condition of the quads in general and the hip flexors, and it'll just condition. It can't but complement their practice, and it'll give both strength and improved lengthening of tissues that could be potentially stuck shorter than what is their potential length of tissue.
And that also, to piggyback off that people could potentially benefit from, especially within powerlifting, when you're limited by equipment. If someone is normally, let's say, a wider stance, low bar squatter that they typically do, then if they're limited by weight, then switch it up and switch to high bar squatting, because they're probably going to have to use less weight initially. But it's an opportunity. If they're limited by weight, how do they make a squat harder? It's do the variation that you're less strong at, So, and it could be the same could be said for or even if they're limited. And again, I think that concept of pre-fatigue might come into play as well, more and more useful for people if they're limited by weight. So let's say even starting a lower body training session or a squat session or whatever, starting it with something that's going to, they might start with stuff like heavier lunge variations for the, let's say it's called an anterior knee and hip extensor, whereas as a more hip dominant, they could start, if they're limited by weight especially, loading up the torso and maybe working on good morning variations as a means of pre-fatiguing the posterior chain and loading up the lower back musculature in particular quite a lot. And then by the time you get to the back squat or your competition squat later on, there's a lot of pre-fatigue there that will make whatever weight you are lifting much harder. So it's kind of being willing to lift less weight and have it feel harder could actually be allow you to do things that could get more out of your strength training. Especially because a lot of these powerlifters, I wonder how many people that have enough weight to be able to train like they did before. You know?
Yeah, that's a very real issue for a lot of them. Okay, I think we've got a good bit of very applicable information there now in the last hour and 3/4. So going to start to kind of wrap things up now. At this point, Robbie, if there's any listeners who've enjoyed this podcast and want to find out more about yourself and follow the content you put out and the work you do, where would be the best places to find you?
As it stands now, I've just modified the website so that Cafe Move Cork no longer, the website itself doesn't present Cafe Move Cork since it's closed, and it's more representative of my online coaching going forward. So if somebody was interested in looking at that or interacting in a conversation in regards to how I'm going to do my online coaching, they'll be able to find me through cafemovecork.com. And it'll be the same for the social media platform itself is cafemovecork.com. And again, you can expect the content to begin to change from what used to be sharing what was happening inside the place to something more relevant to me personally and where I'm going forward. So if you're interested in hearing more from that, it would be social media, Instagram, Cafe Move Cork, Facebook, Cafe Move Cork, and to learn more about working with me professionally or engage with me, just shoot me an email. You'll be able to find that on cafemovecork.com.
Savage. And Ciaran, could you do the same, please?
I have purposefully withdrawn from social media for a while because I've been doing a lot of study and a lot of reading and writing. So I found I'm the kind of person that my attention gets fragmented very easily. So I found that at the moment I've been very inactive on social media, but I'll be dipping back in and out. I'm on Instagram at CT Quarrelsome and on Twitter at CT Quarrelsome as well. And then, but I think probably, I don't know when I'm actually going to ever use social media again other than to post podcasts or potentially share this when it comes out. So I think if anyone wanted to contact me, and I still coach online with Sigma Nutrition, if anyone wanted to contact me, the best way for any reason would be to email me, Ciaran@sigmanutrition.com is the way to contact me. And then I have a website that is a hub for lots of stuff for anything I've written. I write a lot of articles or have written. Anything I've written, and my own podcast as well is on my website, quarrelsomeliferadio.com. They're probably the best. Or sorry, quarrelsomelife.com and Quarrelsome Life Radio is the podcast. That's all on there on the website. If anyone wants to follow up on anything, or email's definitely best though from a contact perspective. I have been on Instagram since, I think I put my phone into a drawer last Friday. I don't think I haven't taken it out since. So I probably I think I've got some. I must log in later on and see. What?
You might have some notifications to attend to.
Probably, yeah. I get distracted easily though, so I had to abandon ship for a while when I was getting some work done.
I know that feeling.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, lads, this has been fantastic. Thank you both so much for doing this. Before we say our goodbyes, any closing thoughts from either of you?
Back to what we discussed, I think for your crew, your listeners, and now is a good opportunity to dig into your why. I think you got enough information, I think, from Kieran and whatever I offered in regards to your actual practice. But yeah, I would encourage people to, I think, just to dig into their why. I think there's only more force to be found there. Yeah,
to piggyback on that as well. Like I don't think there's a more important question to ask yourself. You know, because you could potentially, as we said earlier on, learn things that could be of benefit for the rest of your life. And even if it's not, even if you don't end up nailing anything down, the process itself of introspecting, I think, just increases the likelihood of you being a more robust individual in and out of your own sport. And within that, there's actually, I will finish on this, is that there's a really cool line by Carl Jung, that psychoanalyst, Sigmund Freud's protege. He said, what you most need to find is where you least want to look. So I think that's a nice parting message, I suppose.
Interesting. I'm going to have a think about that. Nice one, lads. Right, I'm going to leave you get to the rest of your day, and thanks again for doing this. It's been great.
All right, thank you, man.
Thanks very much, Arthur. Nice one, Kieran. All the best, man.
Oh, that was cool, man.
That went all right, eh?
Yeah.
That's himself there in the photograph, is it?